Our rights can be violated in basically three ways. Our rights can be violated by hostile foreign governments or terrorist organizations. I'm sure Doug Bondo covered that material with you this morning. So we have the military to deal with that threat to our rights. Our rights can also be violated by common criminals. This morning on the news, we heard about this bad guy in Cleveland who held these women hostage for several years. He's going to be sentenced today, and thankfully it looks like he will never get out of prison. So criminal element is also a threat to our rights. Our rights can also be violated by the government. Illegal searches, illegal wiretaps, false arrests, illegal property seizures, wrongful convictions, these types of things. So the fundamental challenge has always been that we want to give the government enough power so that it can apprehend and punish criminals, but not so much power that the government itself becomes destructive of the very freedoms we wanted it to protect us from in the first place, to protect us against the foreign threats and domestic criminals. Now, the most important insight or observation that I think a libertarian brings to the criminal law field is the idea that the state is 1,000 times more dangerous than all of the common criminals combined. The government is the greater threat to our liberty. Now, this is a point that is sometimes lost in our law schools. Law students and law professors sometimes say that, we have some peculiar rules and procedures in the United States. Attorney-client privilege. Why should we respect that? Why don't we eavesdrop on those conversations? Why don't we subpoena lawyers to tell us what their clients are telling them? We have protections against police interrogation. Why do we have limits on that? We have rules about requiring jury verdicts to be unanimous. Isn't that too high? Why don't we lower it? They say that these are impediments to finding the truth. And they say that other countries have better criminal justice systems. They don't have these rules or impediments, so maybe we should rethink some of these rules. And I think the proper response is that our system was not set up solely with an eye towards finding the truth. That's an important objective, but it's not the only objective. Our system was set up with a strong bias towards protecting the rights of citizens. Again, most of the protections in our Bill of Rights are designed to restrain and limit the power of government because the founders recognized, as I said, among all the threats to our liberty, they thought the government was one of the primary threats. So they put this emphasis on these procedural protections to limit the government to better protect liberty. So with those basic principles in mind, now I want to get more specific about some of the basic American principles that I think are in the most danger these days from the way in which we observe the way the government is operating. And the first one I want to touch upon is the foundational principle that has been under attack in recent years, and that is the division between the military and civilian law enforcement. That has been a traditional American principle from the beginning, is that we want to keep these two things separate. But largely with the drug war, we are seeing there's two aspects to this militarization. On the one hand, the military itself is getting more and more involved in policing. We have Marine units operating in the interior of the country in Texas and along the border. We know that the Navy are using its assets in the Caribbean to chase drug smugglers. Those are two examples. And we are also seeing our civilian law enforcement agencies. This is the other aspect, the other side of the coin, is our civilian police units are increasingly adopting the tactics of our military. And there's been a proliferation of paramilitary units in our American police departments. They're called different things in different jurisdictions. The most common thing is the SWAT teams. In other jurisdictions, they're called special response teams. But they all have one thing in common. They operate in a paramilitary fashion. When you look at the garb and equipment that they're carrying, the helmets, the camouflage uniforms, the weaponry that they're carrying, M16s, flashbang grenades, and then the tactics that they're using. military type tactics. You've seen some of it on television, I'm sure, where they run up to a house, one knock on the door, and then the battering ram comes and the door goes down, and then they go rushing inside, screaming. Sometimes these raids are done in the middle of the night where the occupants of the home think that they're about to be burglarized or going to have criminals coming in, and there's shootouts between ordinary homeowners when they're going into the wrong house and the police. This is one of the most serious problems, I think, in American policing today, is that we've blurred the mission of these two different agencies. When you think about it, the role of the military is to find the enemy, to destroy the enemy. They're not thinking about rights of people on the other side of the battlefield. Their mission is to find the enemy and subdue them. When it comes to the American policing, police departments, we used to call them peace officers. The idea for them, they're encountering people who have constitutional rights. We want them to use the absolute minimum amount of force that may be necessary to bring a suspect into a court of law where things can be resolved peacefully, where the accusations can be aired in court, and where they can make their defense. So when we begin to blur these two different missions, the military mission and the policing mission, we end up with unnecessary confrontations, unnecessary shootings, unnecessary injuries and deaths in some instances. If you go to the Cato website, we have a map that we've created a couple of years ago. We call it the raid map. So if you just Google Cato and raid map, we have a map of the United States where all of these paramilitary type raids have been conducted, because it used to be the idea is like when one of these raids happened in a wrong door, wrong home situation and somebody was killed, people would say, gosh, that's terrible. Thank goodness it's a rare occurrence. And what we tried to do with this map is bring to the attention of more people that these are not rare instances, that these types of raids are happening hundreds of times a month. And fortunately, most of the raids, like the wrong door raids, they go in, they discover it's a mistake and leave. But sometimes there is a shooting, and sometimes it's a killing, and it's only then where usually the media get involved and start reporting on these instances. And sometimes it's the local city councils and city mayors. It's only when there's a death and a lawsuit against the city that they realize what their own police department is doing and how active. And some of these SWAT teams and paramilitary units are not just in the big cities anymore. They're in some small towns. And the local civilian oversight folks are just totally unaware of it until a lawsuit is brought against the municipality. Then they're like, well, I didn't even know we had a SWAT team. We haven't had a murder in this town in 7 years. What are they doing? And so that's when the scrutiny comes. Unfortunately, it's sometimes too late when somebody has been killed and a lawsuit has been brought. Now, that's not to say that there's no place at all for SWAT teams. What we tried to point out in our scholarship here at Cato is to remind people that those units were initially created with the idea of some special limited situations, like a hostage situation, or when the police knew in advance they were going to encounter an especially well-armed group, then there might be a place for the SWAT mission. But what has happened is they've gone well beyond those special limited circumstances into routine policing activity, executing search warrants, and that's where the real problem is.